I need to tell you about a shift in the global monetary system that is happening right now in real time, and almost nobody is paying attention to it. China has reduced its holdings of US Treasury securities by over $700 billion since 2013. That is not a portfolio adjustment. That is a systematic, decade-long divestment from the dollar system, and it is accelerating. In the last 18 months alone, China has sold over 100 billion in treasuries while simultaneously purchasing gold at a pace that has broken every historical record. The People's Bank of China added to its gold reserves for 18 consecutive months through early 2024 before pausing briefly and then resuming. They are not buying gold because they think it will go up in price. They are buying gold because they are preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer the undisputed reserve currency. Subscribe now, because what I am about to explain is not a geopolitical theory. It is a mechanical sequence that I have watched play out across every major reserve currency transition in modern history. The British pound, the Dutch guilder, the Spanish real. Every dominant currency eventually faces the same terminal condition. The issuing nation's debt exceeds the world's willingness to hold that debt as reserves. And when that threshold is crossed, the transition happens faster than anyone expects. The United States is at that threshold right now, and China is positioning for what comes next. Here is the mechanism step by step, because until you understand how this works, you cannot understand why your dollar-denominated savings are at risk. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. That status gives the United States an extraordinary privilege. We can print dollars, and the rest of the world accepts them as payment because they need dollars to buy oil, to settle trade, to hold as reserves in their central banks. This system works as long as the world believes two things. First, that the dollar will hold its value. Second, that the United States will remain the dominant economic and military power capable of enforcing the system. Both of those beliefs are eroding simultaneously. Here is the data. In 2000, the US dollar represented approximately 71% of global central bank reserves. Today, that number is 58% and falling. The decline is not random. It is driven by deliberate policy decisions by countries that have concluded the dollar system is being weaponized against them. When the United States froze Russia's $300 billion in foreign reserves in 2022 after the Ukraine invasion, every central bank governor in the world took note. If your reserves can be frozen with a keystroke, they are not really yours. That realization triggered the largest acceleration in de-dollarization in modern history. China's response was immediate and structural. They did not issue a press release. They did not announce a policy shift. They simply began executing a three-part strategy that I've been tracking quarter by quarter for the last 2 years. Part 1, dump US Treasuries. China's Treasury holdings peaked at over $1.3 trillion in 2013. As of the most recent Treasury International Capital Report, China holds approximately 770 billion. That is a reduction of over 500 billion in a decade. The selling has accelerated in the last 2 years as US interest rates have risen and the dollar has strengthened, creating the perfect cover for a strategic divestment disguised as portfolio management. Part 2, accumulate gold. The People's Bank of China has been the largest sovereign buyer of gold in the world for 3 consecutive years. In 2023 alone, China purchased over 225 tons of officially reported gold. The key word is officially reported. Independent analysts tracking physical gold flows through Hong Kong, Shanghai, and refinery data estimate actual Chinese accumulation could be double or even triple the official figures. Gold has one property that makes it irreplaceable in a de-dollarization strategy. It has no counterparty risk. It cannot be frozen, sanctioned, or devalued by another nation's policy decision. When you hold gold, you hold an asset that has been accepted as money for 5,000 years and will be accepted as money long after the current monetary system has been forgotten. Part 3, build alternative payment systems. This is the part that almost nobody in Western financial media is covering with the urgency it deserves. China and Saudi Arabia have been conducting oil transactions in yuan since 2022, not dollars, yuan. The petrodollar system, the arrangement where oil is priced in dollars and oil exporters hold dollar reserves, has been the foundation of dollar dominance for 50 years. That foundation is cracking. Saudi Arabia, the largest oil exporter in the world and the anchor of the petrodollar system, is now accepting yuan for oil sales to China. The transactions are settled through the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange. China pays in yuan, Saudi Arabia receives yuan, and critically, Saudi Arabia is not converting those yuan back into dollars. They are holding yuan reserves and using them to buy Chinese goods, Chinese infrastructure projects, and Chinese technology. The loop is closed. Oil flows from Saudi Arabia to China. Yuan flows from China to Saudi Arabia. Yuan flows back to China to purchase goods. The dollar is completely bypassed. This is not a pilot program. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a functional alternative to the petrodollar system, and it is scaling. Subscribe now because the implications of this shift are so far-reaching that most investors have not even begun to think through the second and third order effects on their portfolios. Here's what happens when the dollar loses reserve currency status. It does not happen overnight. It happens gradually, then suddenly. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency until it was not. The transition took 30 years from 1914 to 1944. But the bulk of the damage happened in a 5-year window from 1939 to 1944, when Britain's debt and military overextension made holding pounds untenable for foreign central banks. The United States is in the early stage of that same transition. The debt is $36 trillion and growing. The military is overextended across Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific. The political system is paralyzed between fighting inflation and funding the government. And the primary geopolitical rival, China, is systematically building the infrastructure to replace the dollar in the exact same way the United States built the infrastructure to replace the pound 80 years ago. The mechanics of what happens next are predictable because they have happened before. Foreign central banks reduce their dollar holdings gradually to avoid triggering a panic. The reduction shows up as declining Treasury purchases at auctions, higher yields required to attract buyers, and a weakening dollar on foreign exchange markets. The Federal Reserve responds by either allowing yields to rise, which increases the government's borrowing costs and accelerates the debt spiral, or by stepping in to buy the treasuries that foreign central banks are not buying, which is money printing under a different name and accelerates inflation. Both paths lead to the same destination, a loss of purchasing power for every dollar-denominated asset. Your savings account, your treasury bonds, your money market fund, all of them are denominated in a currency whose primary competitive advantage, reserve status, is being systematically dismantled by the second largest economy on earth. Here is the timeline I am watching. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have been discussing a common currency for trade settlement since 2023. The discussions have moved from theoretical to operational. If the BRICS currency launches, and I believe it will within the next 3 to 5 years, it will provide an alternative reserve asset for central banks that want to diversify away from the dollar, but do not want to concentrate entirely in yuan or euros. That alternative is the inflection point. Once central banks have a viable third option, the dollar's share of global reserves will decline not at 1% per year, but at 5 to 10% per year. That pace of decline will force the Federal Reserve to choose between defending the dollar through higher interest rates, which crashes the economy, or accommodating the decline through money printing, which crashes the currency. I have spent 50 years studying how empires manage the transition from dominant currency issuer to secondary player. The pattern is always the same. The declining power tries to maintain the system through military enforcement, through diplomatic pressure, through financial coercion. It works for a while, then it does not. And when it stops working, the repricing happens fast. Here is what I am doing with this information. I am reducing exposure to long-duration dollar-denominated assets. That means selling 30-year Treasury bonds, reducing exposure to dollar-based money market funds, and avoiding any asset whose return depends on the dollar maintaining its current purchasing power over the next decade. I am increasing exposure to real assets with no counterparty risk. Gold is the most obvious expression of that trade. It is liquid, it is recognized globally, and it cannot be printed or frozen. But real assets also include productive farmland, energy infrastructure, and equity in businesses with pricing power that can pass inflation through to customers. I am also watching the yuan-gold relationship. China is building a system where the yuan is backed not explicitly by gold, but implicitly by the option to convert yuan into gold through the Shanghai Gold Exchange. This is not a formal gold standard. It is a market-based mechanism that gives yuan holders confidence that their currency has a floor denominated in a hard asset. If that system gains adoption among oil exporters, if Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other Gulf states begin accepting yuan for oil and converting a portion of those yuan into gold through Shanghai, the petrodollar system will have a functional replacement. And the dollar's reserve status will be competing on fundamentals, debt levels, fiscal discipline, political stability, rather than on inertia and network effects. The United States does not win that competition. Our debt to GDP ratio is 130% and rising. Our political system cannot agree on a budget. Our military is overextended. And our primary competitive advantage, the fact that everyone else was already using dollars, so you might as well use dollars too, disappears the moment a credible alternative exists. China is building that alternative right now. The Treasury dump is not a sell-off. It is a reallocation. The gold purchases are not speculation. They are strategic positioning. The petro-yuan system is not a pilot program. It is the foundation of a post-dollar monetary order. I want to be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying the dollar will collapse tomorrow. I am not saying you should sell every dollar-denominated asset you own. I am saying that the structural conditions that have supported dollar dominance for 80 years are eroding, that China is actively accelerating that erosion, and that the investors who wait for the transition to be announced on CNBC will be the last ones to reposition. The $3 trillion Treasury dump is not the crisis. It is the signal that the crisis is coming. The gold accumulation is not the hedge. It is the confirmation that the largest central banks in the world are preparing for a monetary reset. The petro-yuan is not the alternative. It is the proof that the alternative is already functioning. Subscribe now because the window to reposition is open today. It will not be open when the BRICS currency launches, when Saudi Arabia announces yuan-denominated oil contracts as the default, when the Federal Reserve is forced to choose between defending the dollar and funding the government. By the time those headlines arrive, the repositioning opportunity will be gone. In 50 years of watching currency transitions, I have learned one thing. The transition is always more obvious in hindsight than it was in real time. The British pound holders of 1939 did not wake up one day and decide the pound was finished. They woke up every day for 5 years watching small signals that they rationalized away until the repricing happened all at once. China dumping treasuries is a small signal. China buying gold at record pace is a small signal. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil is a small signal. Each one, individually, can be explained away. Together, they form a pattern that has preceded every reserve currency transition in history. The question is not whether the transition is happening. The data makes that clear. The question is whether you reposition your wealth before the market prices in what China has already concluded. The dollar's dominance is ending, and the endgame has already begun.